sides. The Emperor Trajan engineered a cutting 40 meters deep to extend the Appian Way along the coast. The idea of building a straight road from scratch was a new one. Up until now, roads had evolved from ancient tracks. They sidestepped rivers and avoided hills. But to the Roman mind, this was inefficient.
The Roman roads were built very carefully because they were the core of the Roman communication system. Making roads was a serious business because the roads served many purposes. Transportation of troops, of goods, and they were built by slaves, by soldiers and lower class citizens who would work in private construction companies.
One of the astounding features of Roman roads is how durable they proved to be. They were all built to the same formula. A broad trench was dug and filled with sand and boulders to form a solid foundation. Next went a layer of gravel and coarse stone. This was mixed with clay or mortar before being compacted. Finally, a layer of cambered paving stones, sometimes of basalt, formed the top surface, allowing any water to drain off to the sides. Every 1,000 paces, a Roman mile, was marked by a cylindrical milestone, engraved with details of the current emperor and the distance to the next town. While roads held the empire together, it was architecture that displayed Roman mastery of the world. The most visionary Roman building remains the Pantheon. It's a temple dedicated to all the gods and was built by the Emperor Hadrian in 125 AD. Like a time capsule, the Pantheon remains the best preserved Roman building, marking one of the greatest achievements in world architecture. Its central feature, an oculus, a circular hole 10 meters wide, open to the heavens. Its dome, 43 meters across, meant its designers were taking a risk. It was the largest ever made without reinforced concrete.
We wish we knew more about the purpose of the Pantheon than we do. It's simply Greek for temple to all of the gods. We know that Hadrian held court there. Presumably the statues of all of the Olympian gods were set up there. But as to its exact function, we're still largely in the dark.
The Pantheon was an obsession for the Emperor Hadrian. He was fascinated by architecture. Hadrian could draw his own architectural plans and blueprints. He had his own villa built as an Egyptian temple.
All of the emperors were passionate about building, but the difference between them and Hadrian is that Hadrian was a kind of amateur architect in his own right and allegedly responsible for some of the designs in his villa at Tivoli.
It's not known which architect designed the Pantheon. Some believe it was Apollodorus, but there are no surviving records. The facade of the Pantheon was designed to express Roman mastery of the world. The Greek portico was supported by 16 of the finest columns. Made from Egyptian granite, they were quarried thousands of kilometers away in Aswan, Upper Egypt, and brought all the way to Rome. The crossbeams running above them were once sheathed in bronze. From here, two gigantic bronze doors, 7 meters high, open onto a vast circular area, half the size of a football pitch.
The interior of the Pantheon is a fantastic space, thanks to its enormous dome, twice as big as any dome that had ever been built before, 44 meters of span. Inside, the only thing you can think of is space. The Pantheon is one of the most famous buildings of the world and one of the best preserved, and yet still enigmatic. We don't know what its original name was. We don't know what it was exactly used for.
The Pantheon was a fusion of both classical and modern styles. It had no architectural precedent. The whole space inside was unsupported, unique in temple design. The Pantheon's dome was an engineering masterpiece.
Other domes had been constructed in Roman architecture before the Pantheon, in bath buildings in particular, but the Pantheon covered a span greater than that of any other ancient structure, and it wouldn't be superseded until the Renaissance.
Building the dome of the Pantheon was the biggest engineering challenge that the Romans ever set themselves. It had twice the span of any dome that they had built previously. The key problem with building any dome is how to stop it collapsing under its own weight. All the time it's trying to push out at the bottom and to fall through the middle. The Romans solved this in two ways. Firstly, they made it very, very thick. And then to stop the dome spreading outwards at the bottom, they built it inside massive buttress-like walls and with a ring of collars around the base of the dome itself. This was a brilliant solution.
The architect had planned for the weight of the giant semisphere to be supported by just 8 piers. These needed to be strong and were built 6 meters thick, but to help reduce their overall weight, they had hollow inspection shafts running up inside them. The dome itself is a highly advanced piece of engineering. Its construction had been worked out to reduce its weight and pressure. It contains many sophisticated features, and its builders used 5 different types of cement.
The secret of Roman concrete was something called pozzolana, the local volcanic sand, which made it almost as hard as stone. And the significance for Roman architecture is that architects could now consider the function of a building and then mold the form of the building to suit the function, rather than what had been the case previously, which is that the function had to be really squeezed into a square box.
The shape of the dome was exquisitely proportioned, being exactly half the dimension of the whole building. Climbing from the ground to the first cornice, the builders used heavy concrete and tufa, or limestone blocks. The next level was built from lighter tufa bricks. The first ring of the dome was made of concrete, but as it grew upwards, the concrete became thinner and was lightened with tufa. At the top, it was lightened further with pumice. Had the architect not reduced weight in this way, the stresses would have been increased by as much as 80%. The architect hid inside the walls a complicated series of arches. These were designed to reduce weight and to direct the pressure down onto the supporting piers. The architect further reduced the weight of the dome by cutting out large square panels called coffers. These gave added rhythm and decoration, as well as lightening the overall load.
The coffers of the dome were gilded, and so it would have resembled a kind of golden canopy above your head.
History doesn't record who was responsible for the Pantheon's revolutionary design. Whether Apollodorus or the emperor himself remains unknown.
The historian Cassius Dio tells a story about Apollodorus and Hadrian, wherein Hadrian showed some of his architectural designs to Apollodorus, who criticized them severely. And according to Dio, ultimately, Hadrian had Apollodorus executed.
If the story is true, Apollodorus never saw the Pantheon in its true glory. But millions have since its completion, and the Pantheon continues to astound the world today. The last of Rome's 7 wonders is the most infamous building on earth, the Colosseum. Behind its beautiful walls were once terrifying scenes of combat, blood and death. The building was the largest and most notorious of all Roman amphitheaters. Standing taller than 16 stories, the Colosseum could hold a crowd of over 80,000. It was an arena of entertainment and a cathedral of death. Plans to build the Colosseum began after the death of the Emperor Nero. His rule of terror had left public morale so low that Vespasian, who followed him, had to build something exceptional to win back public support.
Vespasian was something of an anomaly amongst the Roman emperors. He was hardworking, sober, a plain dealer, honest, frugal. The Romans liked him.
In AD 70, Vespasian's engineers drained Nero's private lake and laid the foundations for Rome's largest amphitheatre.